Up to this point, we've been looking at the problems that arise because of the tremendous success human beings have had for creating complex, informationally rich ecosystems. Now we want to take a look at the mechanisms that have evolved specifically with regard to the internet for trying to deal with this superabundance of information so that people can get access relatively quickly and easily to the information that they want and avoid searching sort of randomly through this giant ever-changing galaxy of data points. We'll start by looking at probably the most familiar mechanism to any internet user, search engines, and then we'll turn our attention to social media news feeds and just in general automated information feeds. What we'll do is we'll sort of pull off the veneer for these two types of mechanisms for managing superabundance of information and look at the underlying assumptions, the way in which they work. And we'll look specifically to see the trade-offs that are involved in utilizing search engines and social media news feeds. There's no doubt that you really couldn't navigate the internet without the use of at least search engines. Nevertheless, you have to be aware of, cognizant of, the limitations that search engines have, the mechanisms by which they accomplish what they do accomplish, and hence what they cannot accomplish as well. And we'll be looking at those rather closely. Then we'll turn our attention to the sorts of exploits and counter strategies that we see emerging within our contemporary information ecosystem, particularly within the context of the internet. We'll start off in this lecture by looking at the personal counter strategies, the personal attempts to exploit the information ecosystem that we've developed that fall under the rubric of fake news. Now, I don't particularly like the term fake news. I think that it's sort of become the blunt instrument of dull minds, that it's used primarily by people to dismiss information that they'd rather not acknowledge or evaluate. So we're not going to talk about fake news as some sort of generic kind of stuff. Instead, what we're going to do is look at individual examples of different types of news sources on the internet and talk about their strengths and their weaknesses and the real risks that you have of being misinformed by them. So we'll start with these personal sources. We'll look at comedic news satire. We'll look at amateur reporting and at counterfeit news. Then we'll turn our attention to personal uses of larger strategies that are usually employed by institutions, organizations, and governments. The first one we'll look at is disinformation. Individuals do employ disinformation, and they also employ propaganda. So we'll look at individual uses of this, and then in the next lecture, next week, we'll start to look at the institutional and organizational techniques for exploiting or otherwise undermining the ability to gather information or accurate information on the internet. So when I first started doing information ecosystems in my critical thinking course, the not surprising comment I would get from students is, hey, look, I can just Google. I don't really need to try and create some elaborate system of trusted sources that I consult on a regular basis. I'll just type in some search terms and I'll get my answers. And in order to really understand why that's inadequate, we really have to understand how search works. So we want to take a look, at least briefly, at how search engines decide what to show you, how they pick out things. So when you type in search terms into a search engine, whether it's Google or Bing or some other search engine, the thing that you need to remember is those search engines, they don't have any direct access or any way of directly assessing the accuracy of the information that they're bringing up, the comprehensiveness of the information. Does it cover all sides or all important aspects of a phenomenon? Doesn't assess the credentials of the author directly, or the commitment of the author or the institution that the author works for to truth and accuracy in reporting. It doesn't assess the organization or the clarity of presentation of the material that's within that page either. Those are all things that are assessed only indirectly through what I refer to as orthographic features, that is, superficial features that are fairly well correlated oftentimes with things like accuracy and comprehension. So when you type in your search terms for a search, so you type in your search terms for a search in Google, then Google consults a giant index that it constantly is creating and refining. So there are automated little bots. Google calls those Google bots. And basically what these bots do is they crawl around the web. They go around all different areas of the web and they look for pages. And when they find pages, they index them. That is, they make note of the sorts of terms that they use, how often those terms are used, and so on. And then that index is what the search engines actually consult when you type in your search terms. And Google's index is about 100 million gigabytes the last time I checked. So it's an enormous index, and that's just an index of the pages. That's not the pages themselves. So how does Google decide, or how does Bing decide what pages are going to be pages that are good for you given the search terms that you've entered? Well, it consults its index, and the index has made note of whether or not those particular terms are used in a page, where they're used. Are they used at the beginning, the end, the middle? Are they used in the title, for example? Are they used in the body? Are they used in the meta tags, the part of the code that you don't see but that tells Google and other internet entities what the content of that page is about? Are there links with the terms that you entered in the search terms? Are they linking to other pages that also have those terms? Are the terms capitalized? So, for instance, at the beginning of the sentence. Are they in the title? Are they in large font? Are they in bold font? Are they in italic font? All of these things are suggestive of, correlate fairly well with pages that are about the stuff that you have typed in with your search terms. In the next module, we'll turn our attention to how it is that a search engine then orders all those pages. It's now decided it's got a whole bunch of pages that correspond to your search terms. They're about what you want to read about. How does it decide what order to present them to you in the results?